3, 2, 1. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Timothy here. We're looking at the full spoiler today, so I'm going to break this up into 3 videos. The first is going to cover the colorless and green cards, and I'm just going to go down the list in straight off of mythicspoiler.com, so everything you're seeing here is the way they posted it. And, you know, I'm only going to be looking at cards that were fully spoiled that I haven't already looked at, and then I'll be doing my kind of review in a separate set of videos. But we're going to start by looking at the colorless cards and the green cards together in this video, and then we'll pick up, I believe, with the red cards next after that. And we'll chunk them 2 at a time. So colorless and green, red and probably blue or black or something like that, and then white and the remaining color in the last video. So 3 separate videos. Check them out. Thanks for being here with me, and we're going to kind of breeze through a lot of these because we're looking at the chaff now, right? I will say before getting into this that Kaladesh has, or Aether Revolt has a lot of cards that look playable. I didn't see very many cards that stood out to me and just struck me as cards I would never play. It seems like every card, or the majority of cards, have a home in some sort of deck. And I'm excited to see how they work out. But we're going to start with the automaton here. We've actually already seen one of this cycle. It was the Aegis automaton that can bounce your own creatures for, I believe it was 4 and a white. And it appears that's an entire cycle of cards. So we're going to look at the green automaton real quick, which is just 3 and a green to put a 1/1 counter on itself. And it's a 2-mana 1/2 artifact creature. As with the Aegis automaton, and as you'll see with the rest, this isn't a particularly good card. It is a mana sink, and they're all mana sinks. So if that's relevant and Aether Revolt turns out to be a very slow format, then I could see these cards doing a little bit of work. Or if you just need artifact creatures to fulfill some sort of condition, then they're fine. But none of them are particularly exciting or good, and they are all common, so that's acceptable. This one is particularly good in like green-black if you need cards to be constantly getting 1/1 counters, but you can't put that counter somewhere else, so I'm not really digging the green one very much. The blue one, I think, is probably the best in the cycle, even though, as you can see, it's still not that great. It's a 2/2 for 3 colorless. It is 2 and a blue to scry 1, and that's all it does. So it's a little off curve for a creature, and in a format where you've got a lot of 3/3s and 3/2s for 3 mana, it's not looking too good, although it does block those 3/2s pretty nicely, but that's what you want your 2-drops to be doing. Again, good mana sink, but I can't see my opponent ever playing this and me being like, oh man, they played a Watchful Automaton. If they want to dump 3 mana to scry and that's how they're using their mana, then it's great. You know, wonderful. Go for it. But of course, if you get to the late game and you're both kind of competing and trying to get some sort of edge over the opponent, this could be a good card to put you ahead. But again, not a high priority. Even for blue decks, not a high priority. The red one, not much to say here. It is a 2-mana 2/1, so it is a bear, which is nice. So in a red deck, if you're trying to be aggressive, I could see playing this card. But the effect here is 3 and a red to deal 1 damage to each opponent. In Two-Headed Giant, maybe this is an okay card because it hits both players and effectively dings the team for 2. But the ability, it's just so expensive. Even in 1 versus 1, this is not good. But it is a nice little add-on to an okay playable body. 2-mana 2/1, not exciting, but sometimes you need a 2-drop, and this is the type of card you might be looking for to fill in that gap. Night Market Guard. The black one's farther down for some reason, but we'll get back to that one. Night Market Guard is 3 colorless mana for a 3/1 common construct artifact creature. Night Market Guard can block an additional creature each combat, and you know, that's okay. It's kind of weird. This is like somewhere in between an aggressive creature and defensive creature, but it's not particularly good. Usually your 3/1s want to be attacking, which invalidates the ability. It makes it irrelevant, and 3-mana 3/1s are so much worse than 2-mana 3/1s that I could see cutting this card a lot and not taking it very highly. Colorless is an upside for every card that I'm going to mention here, simply because you could put it in any deck, and sometimes you just need to fill a gap on your curve, and this is exactly that. This is filler, if ever there was filler. Blocking an additional creature is not good on a low toughness creature, and high power, if this was a 2-mana 3/1 and maybe it had Defender and could block an additional creature, then I would consider it, but I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Same with this one. Prize Fighter Construct is 5 colorless mana for a 6/2 common artifact creature, obviously a construct with no abilities. And there are very, very few times that you want a card like this. If you think of Terror of the Fairgrounds, the 4 and a red 5/2, from Kaladesh. How often did you see that card come up? A 2 toughness creature is such a liability in the late game because it just gets blocked by everything. You need something to make it unblockable or give it flying for it to even be a consideration. And even then, like, it's still super vulnerable. Even at 5 mana, like, adding the extra power doesn't make me want to pay an extra mana for this. Maybe if you have Key to the City or something else that can give this flying. Or maybe if you have an improvised deck. I don't know how often that's going to come up, but if you're able to muster together some sort of deck where you can play this very, very cheaply, then I could see a case for it. But as is, I would encourage people to avoid a card like this. Such low toughness does not really add to the high power, and with no abilities, it's just going to get either chumped and be irrelevant, or it's going to just trade off for a pretty weak removal spell or a pretty weak creature. Reservoir Walker is 5 mana for a 3/3 common artifact creature, also a construct. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and get 3 energy. I'm assuming this is a callback to like Peace Walker and the other one. Are they down here? Haha, Peace Strider. I'm sorry. There's a black one too, or not a black one, but one that makes your opponents lose 3 life. This is kind of the same deal. 5 mana, 3/3, not great, but you do get a little bit of value off of it. 3 life is not bad for an ETB trigger on an okay card. Like, this is pushing the boundaries of what you want to play as a vanilla creature. Because once it enters the battlefield, it doesn't really do much. So I would err on the side of saying you really only want this card in your deck if you want the energy, not necessarily the life, but the energy specifically. And even then, there are more exciting cards you can do. 5 mana for a 3/3 is not going to affect the board as much as you want, even though it gives you some nice value along with it. So avoid this card unless you need this card, but certainly don't take it early. Definitely not. I can see that being like a really late pick card. Servo Schematic is 2 mana for an artifact, an uncommon artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless Servo artifact creature token. This is pretty neat. Keep in mind, Fabricate's not around, so you have to look to cards like this or the Kaladesh pack to make those servos for you if you want to go wide or do something like that. It is nice that you get a servo on entering the battlefield. And you do have to kind of do some work, either sack this or, I don't know, get it destroyed somehow, which is a little harder for you to get the other side of the value. So in some cases, it's worse than Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, because Cogworker's Puzzle Knot had the activated ability, but it's still 2 artifacts in one. So again, I'm going to throw up some air quotes. If you're in an improvised deck, this is like the 2-drop you want, this or Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, because it creates 2 artifacts when it enters the battlefield. Even though one of these artifacts is a little bit useless, and sometimes this just functions as a 2 mana 1/1, if you have a deck that wants you to be playing multiple artifacts or have multiple artifacts enter the battlefield or something like that, then Servo Schematic is probably a card you're looking for. If you don't have any use for the schematic itself, or you don't have any way to really sacrifice it or anything like that, then you're probably better off with something like Servo Expedition or Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, which aren't particularly powerful cards but have a lot of combo potential. There aren't a lot of ways to destroy your own artifacts without really doing some work outside of some rares and uncommons. I know there's the Gremlin that sacrifices artifacts to get +2/+2, and this was the type of card I mentioned, like, if you want that card to be good, you need cards like this. But as is, this card's a little bit disappointing, but there's a lot of potential in it in the right kind of deck. It's not a card you want in every deck because you do really need to get it to go to the graveyard for it to be super relevant. Daredevil Pod Racer is 3 mana for a 4/4 uncommon vehicle. At the end of combat, if Daredevil Dragster attacked or blocked this combat, put a velocity counter on it. Then if it has 2 or more velocity counters on it, sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. The crew cost is 2 here. So overall, this is a pretty sweet ability. I don't know what the flavor is. I think the flavor is it just goes so fast that it blows up or something like that. And yes, it looks like a pod racer to me. They all look like pod racers, but the crew cost is pretty cheap. The power and toughness is pretty decent. The initial mana cost of 3 is kind of a sweet spot for vehicles like this that aren't rares. So it's not so pushed that it'll win the game on its own like some vehicles. But it is strong and quite good. And it gets the trigger on blocking, which is not really what you want to be doing. I think you want to be smashing with this. But it's pretty nice that it draws 2 cards later on. It's a little annoying that it has to sacrifice itself. Like, there's not really a lot of ways to mitigate those velocity counters. But at least it replaces itself when it dies. And if you can get a couple good hits in, or at least trade this for a couple good creatures, then it seems fine. As is, I think I like Bomat Bazaar Barge a little bit better, but there's a lot of trade-offs with both cards, in that this one is kind of delayed satisfaction, whereas Bomat Bazaar Barge replaces itself automatically. The Barge, however, is more expensive and has a higher crew cost. This one's cheaper and has a lower crew cost, and does something on blocks, but you are going to lose it eventually. Kind of like Lathnu Helion, the red dude with haste. That card's just going to die on its own at some point, but this one replaces itself, which pushes it in the direction of good. But anyway, moving on. Enough about that one. Filigree Crawler is 4 colorless mana for a 2/2 artifact insect creature at common. When it dies, create a 1/1 Thopter token with flying. Colorless Thopter token with flying. Interesting card. Probably not a good enough rate that you want to pick this very highly. This is like a middle pick. If you have, again, a use for artifacts being on the battlefield or entering the battlefield, then this goes a little bit up in value, but as is, the rate is pretty low on this card, where I don't think I'd want to play it. I don't want this to be my turn 4 play when my opponent's smashing me down or something like that. But the death trigger is pretty sweet, and you know, leaving some sort of value behind. If you can trade this off for a creature and get that Thopter, then it's probably decent. But you know, it's like a middle pack pick for me. Say that 10 times fast. Not much to say about this one. Iron Tread Crusher is a 4 mana vehicle at common. It is 6/6 with crew 3, and that's it. No abilities. So the only vanilla ground vehicle in this entire block, I believe, with Skyskiff, I think, being the only other vanilla vehicle in the entire block. But this card's not great. 6/6 is strong that it's going to smash in, but this just fills a void. If you need a vehicle, you know, you could probably pick this up, and it looks sweet and everything. It's a little flashy, but crew 3 and the 4 mana cost has me kind of pushed away from this. Hopefully you can pick up a better vehicle, because this is kind of, I can't think of a ground vehicle that's really worse than this. I just don't think you want this kind of effect very often. I don't know, maybe I'm underrating it. Maybe the crew 3 and the initial 4 mana is worth the 6/6, but I'm kind of thinking of it in comparison to other vehicles, and I can't think of too many vehicles that are worse than this, besides, you know, like Demolition Stomper. I would even rather have Aradar Express than just a vanilla vehicle that requires a little bit of investment in it, but I'm not digging the card. It is playable. It's not like so trash that you wouldn't put it in a couple decks, but you really have to have a need for vehicles or something like that. So if you have a lot of synergies with vehicles, you have like Depala in your deck or something like that, then maybe this goes up a tiny bit in value, but it's pretty middle ground card for me. Mobile Garrison is 3 mana vehicle. It is a 3/4 with crew 2. It is a common, and when it attacks, you may untap, or you must untap another target artifact or creature you control, which is pretty sweet. I like the way this card's designed because it's pretty cheap. 3 mana for a 3/4 is nice. Crew 2, every now and then you won't be able to crew it, but you will be most of the time. And keep in mind, you have to tap down a creature in order to crew it, so you get to untap that creature at the very worst, meaning that you kind of offset the crew cost there. But as is, it doesn't have any sort of evasion. It doesn't have trample or flying or anything like that. So it is just a big vanilla creature coming in. It seems really sweet with Speedway Fanatic if you can get this down on turn 3. But then again, so is Renegade Freighter, right? This is no Renegade Freighter, but it has a nice little value trigger on it. Essentially giving one of your creatures vigilance, or letting you use a big blocker to crew this, and then also have that big blocker up. So I like this card. I could see myself playing it every now and then, but I'm not super excited. Like, again, I'm not looking for this card really early in the pack. I'll know when I want it, and it won't be too often, but it's at least a little bit more playable and a little bit more useful than this big vanilla Iron Tread Crusher. Here's the Black Automaton. It's a 1 mana, 1/1. For 1 in a black, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it's just a common artifact construct. I mean, I can't say anything about it. This isn't good. This is the type of card that can sometimes be surprising. If you think of Sludge Crawler from Battle for Zendikar, that card turned out to be actually pretty good. But that was a very, very late game set, and it turned out like you usually had a lot of mana in the late game. Again, this is the type of card that maybe Aether Revolt is just super, super slow and dirtily, and focuses on the late game, in which case this card could go up a little bit and get some value in the early game. But as is, this normal type of card is normally not that good. It is a cheap investment. And this is the type of card people look at and they play it a lot. You might get in like 3 to 5 damage, which is great, but it's just blanked so often. And like I said, there are a lot of bears in the format, and I don't really want to be using my first and second turn to trade with my opponent's bear. So I'm kind of off the card until I see a reason to think otherwise. For everybody with your Juggernaut EDH decks, that is nobody. Barricade Breaker is 7 mana for an uncommon artifact creature. It is a Juggernaut, and it is a 7/5 with Improvise, and it must attack each combat if able. 7 mana is very, very high. 7/5 is also very, very large. My least favorite line of text in the entire game of Magic is must attack each combat if able. I hate that. Like, sometimes you just have to run this into a thing. And it is worth noting, there are a couple little Death Touch creatures floating around in this set at common and uncommon, not to mention like Nardum Cobra from Kaladesh. So sometimes this thing just sucks. And sometimes it's great. If you can get this out on like turn 4 in a really dedicated artifact deck, because it does have Improvise, then we're talking about it. But at 7 mana, I'm kind of off the card. If you have to pay full price for this, your deck's probably not working out the way you really want it to. And this is not really a game ender because it is fragile. It just doesn't do anything besides be a big creature. And usually those cards need a little bit more going for them. Looks like it should have trample or something, but it doesn't. Consulate Turret is 3 colorless mana for a common artifact. You may tap it to get an energy, or you may tap it and pay 3 energy. Consulate Turret deals 2 damage to target player. Now, this is the type of card I was looking at when I was revealing Kaladesh, not Aether Revolt, but actual Kaladesh. I was saying, be on the lookout for some sort of artifact or land that taps and gives you energy. And we didn't really get something like that. We got Fabrication Module, which is a mana-intensive way to tap and get energy. But this is what you really want in certain energy decks. Play this alongside something like Fabrication Module, and you just have this engine that keeps going. So if you are a dedicated energy deck, you really, really want this card. If you're not, you don't want it, right? So this is a flexible enough card that it's a kind of a build around, and it's kind of good in some decks. So when I do my review, this might have a split score, because in an energy deck it's great, and outside of an energy deck it's virtually unplayable. The second ability is a nice little bonus, not particularly great. Hopefully you're using your energy for your other cards, but on its own, like if all you're doing with this card is tapping it and then every 3 turns dealing 2 damage to your opponent, that's not good. Notice it can't hit creatures either, so it's not like this is a removal spell or anything like that. And it is a 3 mana artifact that probably won't do anything very significant the turn it comes down, but it has a lot of potential in decks that are very energy hungry. And there weren't a lot of effects like this in Kaladesh where you could consistently get energy off of the same card. Normally it was a card that came down, give you a static amount of energy, and then you used it up and you were looking for another card to give you energy. This one's pretty sweet because it fuels itself and fuels your other cards all on its own. Crackdown Construct is 4 mana for a 2/2 uncommon construct artifact creature. Whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or creature that isn't a mana ability, Crackdown Construct gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is a really interesting card. You don't see this sort of effect a lot that tracks when an ability is being activated. It's also the type of card that requires you to understand the difference between a mana or between an activated ability and a triggered ability. This does not trigger off of it's so weird because this is a triggered ability, but it triggers off of other cards' activated abilities. So for instance, if a creature comes down and it has an enter the battlefield ability, this does not trigger because that is not an activated ability. However, if you crew a vehicle or something like that, that is an activated ability, so that would cause this guy to get +1/+1 until end of turn. So very interesting. I can see a lot of judge calls being called on this card. You have to have a really specific combination of cards for this to be good, because making a 3/3 for the turn is still not very good since you paid 4 mana for an initial 2/2. But if you have some sort of board state where you're able to activate a bunch of abilities, or if you have something like some sort of creature that has like a 1 mana activated ability or something like that, then I could see a lot of potential here. But this is the type of card that's going to require me to look back at the set as a full set and see what cards really work with it. keep in mind it works off of artifacts, not just creatures. So for instance, the card we just saw, the turret, if you activate that and get an energy, that triggers this guy's ability. But be careful, be wary of the activated versus triggered ability thing, because it's going to come up on that guy. Interesting card, though. Interesting. All right, we're going to push into the green cards here, and green is looking solid. So this is what's left. We have Prey Upon, just a standard card that we've seen plenty of times before. 1 green, common, sorcery, target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Very good with vehicles, which is worth noting because vehicles are often super, super pushed on power and toughness to the point where they're probably going to survive. Every now and then, Prey Upon won't work out. If this is what you're relying on for removal, then you know that you're going to be in some situations where you can't cast it or it's not going to work in your favor. But most of the time, especially in green, Prey Upon is just a great removal spell, and it's almost always one of the top removal spells. It was just recently in Conspiracy and I believe Eldritch Moon, and it was powerful in both those formats as well. So I have a lot of reason to believe Prey Upon will continue to be powerful in Kaladesh. Aether Revolt. Keep doing that. I would love if someone went back and checked on my videos and figured out how many times I've done that. Ridge Scale Tusker is 3 and double green for a 5/5 uncommon beast creature. When Ridge Scale Tusker enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. This is super powerful, great curve topper for green. And keep in mind, there are some mana ramp cards in this set, so you could potentially get this out a turn early, maybe even 2 turns early. Probably not 2 turns early, but a turn early seems amazing, and even on curve, this is a powerful creature. It's already at good stats for a 5-drop ground creature, and given all of your other creatures, a permanent Anthem effect is fantastic. So green already pushed to the limit with its commons and uncommons, which is carrying over from Kaladesh. Kaladesh had ridiculous green commons and uncommons, and if Aether Revolt is just adding to that, green is still going to be dominant in this format. I will have to look at the whole set before I make that claim, but green super powerful in Kaladesh, green looking pretty powerful in this set. Another cat monkey. Scrounging Banbar is 1 in a green. I think the word Banbar just means monkey, but Scrounging Banbar is 1 in a green for a 0/0 common cat monkey creature. It enters the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of 1/1 counters from Banbar onto another target creature. So this is super sweet, especially if you can get some sort of engine going where you can put additional 1/1 counters on this. You can shift them around on your turn. And as is, this is just a bear. It's a 2-mana 2/2, so it's going to do its job there. And then even if you move a single 1/1 counter to another creature, you're probably putting that creature above curve to a point where it's able to attack freely into your opponent and get ahead on the race. So I think Scrounging Banbar is a good card, and there's a lot of potential for it if there are a lot of ways to generate 1/1 counters in this set, which we've already seen a bunch in Kaladesh and a good number of them in Aether Revolt. So Scrounging Banbar definitely has the thumbs up from me, as opposed to its wily cousin, which is an absolute garbage card. We mentioned Mana Fixin'. Here's Mana Fixin' for you. Unbridled Growth is 1 green for a common aura. You enchant a land. The enchanted land has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And then the cool part about this card is you can sacrifice Unbridled Growth to draw a card. So this is fantastic. This is really good ramp too, or not ramp, but really good fixin' if you're base green, of course. So it turns one of your lands into an all-purpose mana fixer, and then once you don't need Unbridled Growth anymore, you're free to sack it and replace it with itself. And even in that case, it's a 1-mana cantrip, so even if you don't need the mana fixin', or you've already played your card, you've already played a card that really required you to have some sort of other mana in your deck, then you can just cantrip this and replace it by itself. It also works with SRAM, which is pretty nice. Since you cast an aura, you draw a card, and then you draw another card. But this is what Mana Fixin' should look like in a limited set, and this is the type of card that gets me excited to play my 3 or 4 color abominations that people tend to know me for in draft. So I love it. I really do. Especially at 1 green, there's not a lot of investment there. Monstrous Onslaught. Cool art. Anything with Hydras is pretty cool to me. 3 and double green for an uncommon sorcery. Monstrous Onslaught deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control as you cast Monstrous Onslaught. So there's something very interesting with the way that's worded. A lot of times when you play something that tracks the highest power or something like that on your side of the board, your opponent can respond to that and kill your biggest creature, making your card a little bit less effective. This one actually tracks it as soon as you cast Monstrous Onslaught. So here's an example. Let's say I have a 3/3 and a 6/6 on the board, and I cast Monstrous Onslaught. It's always going to deal 6 damage, no matter what. If my opponent kills my 6/6 in response, it's not now going to track the 3/3 as my highest, because it specifies the highest power among creatures you control when you cast the card. So as soon as you cast it, the number is locked in. Your opponent can't tamper with that. And this has the potential to deal a lot of damage. Look at green creatures. Even if you have a 5/5, this is 5 mana, deal 5 damage as you choose, split up between any number of creatures. Like, what in the world? And then if you're thinking even bigger and you have just a huge creature on board, you get to just destroy your opponent and decimate their board. It is sorcery speed, so you're not going to blow somebody out with this or anything like that, but it is super, super powerful. Also, the flavor text. Regards from Pima. Rishkar. Super cool. Very powerful green removal spell. Also, don't see cards like this very often. It's not a fight effect either. It's not like your creature's dealing damage to them or anything. It just deals a lot of damage. Does have the potential to be a dead card if you don't have a lot on board, though. Narnum Renegade is 1 green for a 1/2 uncommon elf warrior creature with Death Touch and Revolt. If when Narnum Renegade enters the battlefield, Narnum Renegade enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So feel free to play this out on turn 1 as a 1/2 Death Touch. That's going to slow the game down. It's going to give you a little bit of leverage if you're trying to get to your later big green creatures or something like that. Or in, around turn 3-ish, if you're able to trade something off, feel free to drop this after the Revolt condition is satisfied and have a 2/3 Death Touch, which is just the most annoying card I can think of out of a 2 or 3 drop. So Narnum Renegade, not a lot to say. It's great with fight spells. Prey Upon or something like that is always good with Death Touch creatures because it guarantees you'll blow up whatever you need to blow up. But yeah, this card is just solid. It's a very good card. And just adding to the plethora of good green cards. Speaking of good green cards, Natural Obsolescence is 1 in a green for a common instant to put target artifact on the bottom of its owner's library. So this is a removal spell for artifacts. It's a little less flexible because this one doesn't hit enchantments, and there are a ton more enchantments and playable auras in this set than there were in Kaladesh. But being able to do this at instant speed, being able to get around indestructible and stuff like that is pretty neat, and it just like dumps it. A lot of people don't view it this way, but this is just a removal spell. Yes, there's a chance they could like shuffle their deck and put it back or get to the bottom of their deck, but how often do people get to the bottom of their deck in Limited? Not very often, right? This could be, and instant speed is great too. This could be like the type of green card you really, really want over Appetite for the Unnatural because it is 1 cheaper, but keep in mind it does not hit enchantments, so don't assume that. Be prepared for the card though. Be aware of the fact that it exists if you are playing an artifact deck as well. Pima Aether Seer is 3 and a green for a 3/2 uncommon elf druid. When Pima Aether Seer enters the battlefield, you get an amount of energy equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may also pay 3 energy. Target creature blocks this turn if able. So sweet little card here. The stats are below average, but hopefully you're coming down and getting a decent amount of energy. And even if this is the only creature on board, you're at least going to get 3 energy because it will count itself if it's the only thing on board. Obviously, so this says enter the battlefield, get 3+ energy, with plus meaning that you have something bigger than a 3 power creature on board. And then you get to kind of like make certain creatures just die in combat. Be careful using this on something with an activated ability, and also be careful using this when your opponent has vehicles because they could crew in response or crew before the block goes through or something like that. But there are some times your opponent's just going to be defenseless against this, and if you have lots of ways to generate energy, then you could really take advantage of a card like this. But it does require you to have kind of a bigger creature on board for it to be super, super relevant, and without that, it's just an okay card. But I have a soft spot for cards like this that force your opponent into blocking. And I think it's going to play out pretty well. I do. Moving along. Almost done with the green. Almost done with the green. We have Lifecraft Awakening. This is X in green for an instant uncommon. Put X +1/+1 counters on target artifact you control. If it isn't a creature or vehicle, it becomes a 0/0 construct artifact creature. So really interesting word in here because you could just dump a bunch of 1/1 counters on some dirtily artifact that doesn't do anything. But obviously the trick here is you use this to make your vehicle a creature. We've mentioned this with a couple other cards in the set already. There are quite a few of them actually, and you no longer have to crew your vehicle. The whole 0/0 thing just means it's now a creature, and the 1/1 counters stop it from dying as a 0/0, which is pretty sweet. It's also an X spell, so it scales in power pretty nicely. Put this on a trampling vehicle when your opponent's not expecting you to be able to crew it, and you can just win the game sometimes. So a lot of potential in this. Or put it on a flying vehicle. You've got like really ridiculous card. Think about even like take the dirtiest flyer, Sky Skiff. If you play Sky Skiff on turn 2 and then you play this on turn 3 and give it 2 counters, you have a 4/5 flyer and you don't have to crew it anymore. Yes, it's a vehicle, so it's a little bit more susceptible to removal because it dies to remove creature removal and artifact removal, but sometimes you can just eke out a win before that's relevant. And you can just put this on some other artifact creature. You can put it on any artifact you want, but if you don't have a vehicle to really get fancy with it, just feel free to dump a bunch of counters on a creature you control, and it's an instant as well, so your opponent may not be expecting surprise blocks. A lot of time when you're attacking against a green player, you're like, well, what could they have? They have no real creatures on board, something like that. You know, they have sorcery-based removal. Well, a card like this can completely destroy your opponent if they're not ready for it. So super sweet, super sweet. Lifecraft Cavalry is next up. This is a 4 and a green 4/4 trampler. It is an elf warrior. It's common. It has Revolt. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters if a permanent left your side of the battlefield that turn. So 5 mana 4/4 trample is shruggable, kind of cuttable, not really the top end card you want. 6/6 trampler on the other hand is really good for 5 mana. So there's a lot of a balance here, as is, so to speak. It's the definition of a balanced card, right? It has a top end, it has a low end, and you need to work a little bit to get the top end to work. Now, being at 5 mana, there's a lot of potential for you to just make attacks, have one of your creatures die, and then play this as a 6/6 trampler. As is, I think it's a little bit weaker than, well, no, it's kind of on par with Riparian Tiger, right? Riparian Tiger at least gets one shot as a 6/6, but it's always essentially a 4/4, and when you run out of energy, it's not great. This guy comes down and is very much the same as Riparian Tiger, but has the potential to just be a permanent 6/6. So green gets another really strong common to kind of fill out your curve if you don't hit the bomb rare you're looking for or something. This card is perfectly serviceable and has the potential to be a really big stompy creature, which is great. Which makes me wonder why Cow Prowler has to exist, because Cow Prowler just sucks. About, I think, 4 more green cards left. We have Lifecrafter's Gift, which is 3 and a green for an instant uncommon. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, then put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it. I don't know if this card's existed or not, but it sounds very, very familiar, and maybe I'm just blanking on the card that it reminds me of or something like that. But overall, this gets to put at least 2 1/1 counters on a creature you control, and hopefully if you're in like the green-black 1/1 counter deck, you get to spread out even more counters. So I think if you ever get to put 2 1/1 counters on a creature and this kind of splashes over to at least one other creature, it justifies its spot. If you're not in a deck that's really positioned to take advantage of 1/1 counters, I would avoid playing this card because 4 mana for 2 1/1s on a single creature is not really a great rate. But if you have a deck that's really optimized for this to be good, then you know when you'll want to play it. Also worth noting that, you know, it plays very well with Fabricate creatures because you have that option to put a 1/1 counter on those creatures itself. It doesn't require any other cards to work out. So interesting card here. Don't think it's like first pick material or anything like that, but you'll be happy to play it when it works out in your deck. Malphus Revolutionary is 1 and double green for a 3/3 uncommon human warrior with trample. 3/3 for 3 with trample is great. When Malphus Revolutionary enters the battlefield or dies, For each kind of counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. So this is super strong. What you really want to do is have some sort of energy on yourself or have something with a 1/1 counter it by the time you play this on turn 3, and then you get to tack on an additional energy or +1/+1 counter, and then it gets to do it again when it dies, right? So you have a lot of value out of your 3-drop creature here. This is what I consider a very high pick card. It's great on curve. It passes what people call the vanilla test. A 3/3 for 3 with trample on top of that is already good. The double green makes it a little bit trickier, but not so much trickier that you won't just jam it in all your green decks anyway. And then it has value on entering the battlefield and dying. So it's a good creature that you would trade off if you have to, if it gives you some sort of benefit. And keep in mind, you can choose yourself. If you have energy, you can choose a creature with a 1/1 counter, or if there are any other kind of fancy counters. If your opponent has a velocity counter on something, you can give them a velocity counter. Whatever, I don't know. But yeah, pretty sweet card here. Very first pickable card too, in my opinion. Obviously, this is all my opinion. And 2 more green cards to go, and we'll call it quits for this video and pick up on the next one. High Spire Infusion is 1 and a green for an instant. A common instant. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. You get 2 energy. So Giant Growth, that gives you 2 energy for 1 additional mana, which is really, really sweet. And I like this sort of effect. At instant speed, these effects are great. Cards like Larger Than Life are borderline just terrible, except in super clutch situations like Electrostatic Pummeler decks, because they're sorceries and your opponent sees it coming. But when your opponent doesn't see it coming, or your opponent can't really play around it, +3/+3 is a really big boost, and it lets you trade off a creature. The card, what is it? Ornamental Courage, I believe. 1 green, 1 +1/+3, and untap target creature until end of turn for 1 green instant. That's a playable card because the +3 is enough that your creature's probably going to survive, and the +1 is occasionally enough that you're able to kill something. Obviously that untaps, but +3/+3 just demonstrates like how strong you can get. This isn't the best combat trick. Obviously the combat tricks here that we've seen from green aren't, I think, as amazing as the overall combat tricks from Kaladesh, but this is a perfectly serviceable card, and if you want energy in your deck, I think you want this sort of card as one of your combat tricks too. So overall, decent power level on the card, but not like a high priority in most decks, I don't think. And finally, we have another cat here to round out the day. Aether Stream Leopard is 2 and a green for a 2/3 common cat creature with trample. When it enters the battlefield, you get an energy. When it attacks, you may pay an energy. If you do, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. No, you can't abuse that and stack the triggers or anything like that. You want to get 1 activation or 1 trigger per attack. But a 4/3 attacking by turn 4 with trample is pretty good, and a lot of times the trample is enough to disincentivize your opponent from chump blocking, meaning that sometimes this just slams in for 4 when otherwise it would get chumped altogether if it didn't have trample on it. This is a pretty nice card, and it's the type of card that requires you to really have some sort of engine going in order for it to be consistently good. It's also a little bit worse on blocks and a little bit worse when you're on the play. Just like cards like Thrive and Rhino and stuff like that. They're much more aggressive, much better when you're on the play. Or I'm sorry, when you're on... Yeah, I meant... let me rephrase that, or at least reiterate it. I'm not sure what I just said. But this type of card is better when you're on the play and you get to attack with it on turn 4, rather than when you're on the draw and you have to play this, and oftentimes you're under enough pressure that you can't really afford to attack in with it all the time. Just like all the other energy-based attacking creatures, the Thriving cycle, they're much better on the play than they are on the draw. This one, if you can generate energy, maybe if you have that turret or something like that to keep the energy flowing, it should be a consistently good attacker, and at some point your opponent's going to have to trade something relevant for it because it is have 3 toughness. I like the card, and I think it adds to a lot of what green has. So overall, the artifacts, there are a lot of splashy, kind of weird ones that require the right kind of decks, but green looks like it has lots of solid cards. Notice that when I was looking through green, there wasn't a single card that I said was like, oh, you'll never play this. I would play almost all of these cards consistently in some sort of green deck. So green looking very powerful. It doesn't have a lot of gaps here. It has some really high-end cards and some decent removal spells as well. So will be added to the suite of ridiculous green cards from Kaladesh, and I'm looking forward to drafting it. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Keep the kind of closing short here because we got 2 more videos to go. My name's Timothy, and I'll see you all in the next video.